Hello and welcome to the world's first Paul Weller fan podcast. It's Desperately Seeking Paul. I'm Dan Jennings. It's a bonus podcast episode, Friday, 28th of October, 2022. Album release day, folks. We are celebrating the release of Will of the People, an album of tracks handpicked by Paul himself, 3 vinyl or CD collection out today that follows on from the Fly on the Wall album and takes us through a similar mix of rarities, this time spanning the period 2002 to 2021. From covers to remixes, Will of the People crosses genres. It features tracks such as Paul's cover of the Beatles' Birthday, released to celebrate Macca's 70th, and the disco ball banger remix of Cosmic Fringes by the Pet Shop Boys. The collection has been compiled by Paul Weller himself. Paul has provided artwork ideas and sketches for the design, and alongside this, Paul has written track-by-track sleeve notes as well. The release includes additional sleeve notes from writer and broadcaster and former podcast guest John Wilson, who joins us on the podcast today. John, hello. Thanks for joining me.
Great to be back, Dan.
Hey, look, album release day. Is there anything more exciting than a Paul Weller album? And this podcast has been running for less than 2 years, right? And here we are. Our third Paul Weller album released in that time. We have Fat Pot, we had an orchestrated songbook, and now Will of the People. I mean, this is ridiculous. How can we keep up?
Wow, more Paul Weller albums than we have prime ministers or chancellors or, they come thick and fast. It's no, you're right. It's amazing. I hadn't thought about that. That's some work rate, isn't it? And actually, because we are going to be talking about Will of the People, I think that says a lot about this album as well, because this is not an album packed with hits or those well-known album tracks. This is a lot of tracks which are the remixes, the demos, and actually just tracks which are really good that didn't make its way onto an album. And that says something about his incredibly prolific work rate, I think, doesn't it?
Yeah, and some of it doesn't listen to the album and the tracks on it and stuff. It doesn't feel like this is a quality control issue. He's not kind of rejected stuff because it's not up to scratch. It's more that it doesn't fit anywhere else. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's right, actually, because a lot of the albums do start with a particular song. I mean, as we know, True Meaning started with Gravity, I think he wrote, and that was some years before. And he realized that Gravity didn't fit with whatever he was doing at the time, whether that was Sonic Kicks or probably Saturn's Pattern, I would have thought, something like that. And then he realized it then kickstarted a different kind of musical direction, and then he followed that. And some of these songs, well, they come from, what is it? It's about 20 years, isn't it? I think it's about 20 years.
Yes, it's exactly 2002 to 2002,
now, right? Which is astonishing when you think there's already been a very thick collection of outtakes and demos and those tracks which didn't make it on the Fly on the Wall collection, which was probably around that time, early 2000s, wasn't it?
That was 3 CDs, 3 albums, 3 LPs. This is the same thing, right?
Same sort of thing. And this picks up where that left off. Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking back through the album as we're chatting here, Dan, just to remind myself what's on it. And actually, there are some really great tracks, aren't there? Tracks which easily would have found their way onto any of those albums from the last few years and stood up along with some of those best tracks, and others which really are. And I'm slightly more intrigued, I think, by the things which are the sketches, which are just very, very tantalizing, which, you just think, which direction would that song have gone in if he'd worked it up, with a full band or with an orchestra or whatever.
And are you one of those guys who so we're on the eve, I think, of the Beatles Revolver and this huge big box sets of all the outtakes and the kind of work in progress of those songs. Are you a guy who likes those kind of things and likes to hear the development of a song before you get to the end product?
Yeah, with artists that I like, I mean, I wouldn't be working my way through a Duran Duran outtakes album. I'm not sure I'd be shelling out for that. Revolver, God, I can't wait. In fact, spoke to Klaus Vormann this week and did a piece. By the time this is out, the thing that I would have done for the Today program on Radio 4 hopefully would have gone out, although we are in the midst of the most outrageous political turmoil that I'm not sure whether my little interview with Klaus Vormann talking about designing the Revolver sleeve will actually make it on air. But no, Klaus was great. And he was obviously talking about the sleeve, but he also, when we were chatting, said that he was invited down to the studio when they were making Revolver to hear the sort of thing. And he said the development, the huge musical leap which he witnessed there, and obviously most apparent in Tomorrow Never Knows, that was his jumping off point for designing that Revolver sleeve. But yeah, no, I mean, I'm like that, obviously, with Weller albums. And as we've talked about before, I am just so lucky to have been a few times down at Black Barn in the studio when some of these things are being worked out. And I've seen how he works, and it's so instinctive and it's so quick. That's not to say it's just all sort of made up on the spot. There's a lot of work done in Paul's head, I think, either at home on a piano, with a guitar, whatever. Sometimes songs come fully formed, but other times you can see that process of just it's almost musical alchemy. He hears in his head, well, let's put a bit of that on and put a bit of that. It needs a xylophone here. It needs and I can see that kind of layering. And there's a sense of that going on in this album because it's so varied. There's so many different musical styles, aren't there?
Let's dig into some of this stuff. So obviously you get the invite. When did that happen?
Well, I remember we finished that last interview just before I launched This Cultural Life, wasn't it?
Yes,
so that's just right. Over a year ago. So it was probably, September last year, because we had recorded Macca and I couldn't say who the guest was because
your phone kept pinging with
my phone kept pinging
the next guest.
It was. But
that's right.
God, that was exciting. So that was just over a year ago. Paul just said, I've got this album, compilation, remixes, rarities, things I've been working with in the studio over the years. And do you want to write something about it? Now, I'm not even going to stop and think about that. I'm going to say yes straight away. Of course I will. I mean, that's, it's a lovely thing to be asked to do. But it was daunting, I think, when I sat down to write it, because I'm a big fan of the liner notes from the 60s. There's a lot of those albums, and whether it's the Dylan albums or, a Dusty album, or it was always a thing. And you grab, I can see behind you, you've got a rack full of albums. I've got my albums there. If I pick any number of those albums, you put it on, you listen to it, you look at the picture, but actually the liner notes were always very important. A lot of the jazz albums as well. Fantastic. Sometimes actually they're quite strange. They're quite impressionistic. They're trying to capture a sense of the music rather than just giving a straight biographical resume. So I slightly went at it with that idea of Paul himself being an artist, which I firmly believe, he's a true artist in many senses of the word. And the analogy was with the sketches that what came to mind was the idea that so many of these things are sketches, and he is working in the studio in the same way that a painter would, and some of those big finished masterpiece paintings that you see in galleries around the world, there are often multiple versions of those works, which are the sketches, literally the sketches, where the artist will try out the proportions and the size and the perspectives or whatever. And he's doing that sometimes in these demos. And, I loved that with, what was the Jam compilation? Extras, wasn't it? Which did that. And there's some amazing versions of, just him on the guitar doing Burning Sky, or I think there's a version of the Eaton Rifles on there. Just
him with guitar. Yeah.
Him on a guitar. And there's all sorts on there, which are really fascinating. And I just had that idea, the analogy of the painter, of the artist in the studio. And I've just been to the Royal Academy that week, and there was a show of John Constable, famous for the Haywain and all those big kind of landscapes and those views of Salisbury Cathedral. And actually, it's left me a bit cold. They are very chocolate boxy and they're so well known. And Constable was obviously the great painter of his age because he just captured a sense of Britain at a time of obviously huge self-doubt. And he was so reassuring to the establishment. This is what we are. It's a sort of English idyll. And actually, I was a bit bored by it. But then in the corner of the room, there was this tiny sketch. It's basically a very quickly painted. It's paint. It's not in ink or drawn. It is in watercolor, but it's only, sort of 8 inches by 8 inches or something. And it's a little square painting of rain sweeping in across the channel, across to Brighton Beach. And he's standing on Brighton Beach. And it's really, you can see the sort of the rain is pouring down across the sea, very, very black. When you see a big curtain of rain approaching from a distance. I just had that painting in mind when I was thinking about what Paul was doing, that idea of working very quickly, creating something which in its sort of imperfection is so beautiful and so immediate. And it's probably, as I say, I'm not a big fan of Constable, but I would instantly say that's kind of one of my favorite paintings and my favorite Constable painting. But, and so I kind of started with that, with the idea of him and the analogy of Paul being like a painter. And, and I know Paul, I think, takes inspiration from painters very often as well. We've talked about art a lot. We went to see a Hockney exhibition together a few years ago, the Hockney exhibition at the Tate. And it was just brilliant going around with Paul. Just, you could see what he was getting off, on a lot of that kind of, especially the stuff in the 70s, when Hockney was working again so quickly, and he was cutting up photographs and he was just experimenting and pushing himself on. But then you get right up to the recent work and he's working on an iPad and he's now in his 80s and he's just being as prolific and as experimental as he ever was. And I just think, Paul saw a kindred spirit there. I didn't think the analogy of the painter was misplaced or pretentious. I mean, it's pretty pretentious what I wrote, but it's, I don't think it's too far wide of the mark.
No, it's not pretentious in the slightest, because you do see that connection. That's really interesting in terms of, that's very much how Paul seems to be working in different ways now and embracing technology and the voice note and all that kind of stuff. So
completely.
I love that connection. You write in the liner notes about the power of the B-side from back in the Jam and the Style Council. We'll talk more about that in a sec. But my love of Paul Weller came through the solo years. So of things like Oh Yeah, I got Fly on the Wall or Arrival Time. You got Above the Clouds and Everything Has a Price to Pay, for instance, or The Loved on Hung Up, Ends of the Earth on Wildwood.
And what a song Fly on the Wall is.
Like I said at the beginning, it's like they just don't fit, or he's got extra, he's got surplus. It's not that the quality's bad on them. But you talk about this power of the B-side, and obviously the Jam being your band originally, things like you reference like Dreams of Children and The Butterfly Collector and Tales of the Riverbank. The B-side's always been an important thing to Paul, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I think back in the day, that was very much about looking at what the Beatles did. The idea that you would buy We Can Work It Out and you'd have Day Tripper on the other side, or you'd buy it for Day Tripper and you'd have We Can Work It Out. You got Paperback Writer with Rain as the B-side. And I think that is a B-side rather than a double A side. Just astonishing. One of the most amazing Beatles, one of my favorite Beatles songs. And I think, he applies that same quality control and that logic, or he certainly was then in the Jam. Dreams of Children. I think that was technically a double A side with Going Underground, but that could have been a huge single in its own right. Well, all sorts of things. Tales from the Riverbank, which he still plays, and has played, fairly consistently. That being the B-side of, what was that, Absolute Beginners? Liza Radley, which is just a beautiful, you could regard it as, as a throwaway song, but it's not. It's just a really beautifully rendered sketch of small town loneliness and, the sort of the outsider and, which is a recurring character. And I think in a lot of his songs, the outsider, somebody who doesn't quite fit. And God, you could psychoanalyze Mr. Weller and you realize that's, that young man sitting in the corner of the pub that produces Away from the Numbers, all sorts of songs, that person who he identifies with. It's the artistic spirit, I think. Comes back to the artist again.
Yeah, and there are so many songs on this when you listen to them, things like Pure Sound, tracks like Into the Sea, which are from the Fat Pop sessions, but then right back to times around Floorboards Up and the As Is Now album where you've got Oranges and Rosewater.
Oh, that's a great one, that.
Oh, absolutely stunning, some of these songs on this album.
Golden Leaves as well, I think, is just, that's actually very complete, isn't it? That would have been from the As Is Now sessions in Amsterdam, because it's got the horn section on there and lovely sort of slightly laid back, soulful sound. But that is a really complete track. That could have been on any album, or it could have been on any album at that time. It would have easily fitted on As Is Now. It's probably just a question of too many tracks, not enough time. As simple as that. And then you get those really experimental things in more recent years. I love that remix, the Young Fathers remix of Saturn's Pattern. They're fantastic band.
Great. Brilliant live. So good live, aren't they? Brilliant
live. And, they made some really strange, off-kilter, wonky sounding records. And they bring that kind of strangeness to that remix. No, I think that's great. And that Hopper remix as well.
Yes, which the White Label remix with Tom Doyle and
Tom Doyle, which I think is brilliant, because what's interesting with that is the chord sequence is totally different. It's not like he's just used the same chords and then reapplied them with different instruments or cut it up or whatever. It's actually just totally different chords underneath what Paul's singing, and it fits and it brings a different perspective to the lyric in a way. And again, another song about a painter.
Yes.
About Edward Hopper, and that's Paul's interest in the artist and just capturing mood. And it is a recurring thing, isn't it?
Yeah, there's this lovely line in the liner notes which says, the artist is propelled by a power greater than will or choice.
Oh, yeah. I do believe this. I think there's somebody who is a true artist. They don't actually have much choice in the matter. It's not like, shall I be an artist or shall I be a lawyer? It's like, although actually, I'm sure there's some great musical lawyers out there, and I'm sure there's some great musicians who have got a great legal brain. But if you're going to be an artist in any medium, you just have to pursue it. It's a calling. It's something which you just have to do. I think that's probably what I was just tapping into there. And I've seen that with this, which is why I'm wanted to do this program, This Cultural Life. It's really about the roots of creativity. What is it that drives people on to create and to make art, and whether that's music or whether it's dancing or whether it's writing books or whatever. There is a common cause there, and that's sort of that need to express something about yourself or about the world. Yeah, I think it's quite a pretentious line, but it's not bad.
No, I loved it. You talk about Paul as a live performer as well. Here we are at the time of recording. I think tickets are on sale right now for this incredible celebration in December. So Peter Blake, a concert celebrating his 90th year, the Royal Festival Hall, London. I'm away. I'm gutted, absolutely gutted. If you can check dates with me on this kind of stuff in future, please, Paul. And it's a mixture of electric and acoustic appearances from, and I'm going to do the list. So this is curated by Paul. Madness, Noel Gallagher, Roger Daltrey, Weller himself, Chrissie Hynde, Baxter Drury. And there we have on the notes as well, compared by John Wilson.
I know. God, I mean, to see my name on a billboard alongside those people.
We're up in lights, baby.
Yeah, no, that is going to be, I hope, a wonderful night of celebration, a tribute to the great Peter Blake, lovely man, 90 years old. I think he was 90 in June. And obviously somebody who has not just worked with so many musicians, but obviously is a massive music fan himself. I've been to Peter's studio a couple of times, made a program with him on I think it was his 80th or possibly even his 75th birthday, made an edition of Front Row, and we did a special edition of just me and him wandering around his studio and chatting. And it's an amazing place. He's always got music on in there. He loves the Beach Boys. John Coltrane, loves a lot of jazz. Ian Jury himself. I think he taught, that's the link to Baxter. Baxter's going to open the show. Baxter's dad, Ian, obviously, I think, was great friends with Peter, because I think I'm right in saying that Peter taught Ian at the Royal College of Art.
Oh, okay.
So there's a link there. Back to painters again, you see. Nice. It's all about painters. And so we've got that. And then Chrissie. I mean, it's just great. It's still being worked out at the moment, who's doing what and how they're doing it. And, probably acoustic or semi-acoustic shows. I think Madness are actually going to be doing proper full set, because Madness don't do acoustic, so they're in effect closing the show, headlining, but I think there will be some surprises along the way as well.
Yeah. Well, there are lots of rumours of surely Macca's going to be there, this kind of thing. But the invite
line dropped out there, Dan. I couldn't hear what you said. Sorry.
Presumably the invite came from
testing. Sorry, it all went weird.
Presumably the invite came from Paul, right? Again?
Yeah. It's Paul's idea. He loves Peter. He has been really inspired by Peter. Again, it's what I say about like walking around that exhibition with Paul, the Hockney exhibition. Hopefully we're going to have some messages sent in by the likes of Hockney and some of those other artists, younger artists that have been inspired by Peter, because he is a great artistic godfather to that generation, particularly the so-called young British artist generation of the late 80s, 90s that came through, who were looking very much to what happened, the artistic explosion of the 60s, and doing their own thing, obviously.
Well, it's going to be, it's a very special venue. It's a beautiful venue. It's where we saw Paul do other aspects, obviously, in fairly recent years. But
the Royal Festival Hall, yeah. Amazing. No, it's going to be a really special evening, and I'm going to be comparing the show. We're not sure what that means at the moment. I will be obviously introducing all the guests, maybe doing some chatting on stage with some of our guests.
You don't know if there are plans to film it or record it or anything?
Not at the moment. I think that's all. It may happen. I really don't know. I don't know. He just wants to give something back in the way that he knows. And that is obviously playing music. And because Peter has designed the sleeves of not only Sgt. Pepper's, obviously, and Stanley Road, but he did the Oasis compilation for Noel. He's worked with Madness. And I'm not sure if he's done anything for Chrissie. Chrissie Hynde's on the bill, which is fantastic. Love her voice. But she has been painting recently. She is, again, another painter. She's been exhibiting, and I'm sure she's a great fan of Peter. She's quite figurative, and there's a sort of pop art aspect, I think, possibly to her work. So I'm sure she will have something to say in tribute to Peter on the night as well. I hope. It's a great thing. It's such a lovely thing to be asked to do as well.
I want to also mention this Cultural Life before you go. So BBC Sounds, Radio 4, Saturdays, 7:15.
Tomorrow night, in fact, therefore, on Saturday night, we have the actress Florence Pugh, who was actually really good. And then we have, we finish the series next week with Tim Minchin. We've recently done Glenda Jackson. We've got Alejandro Inarritu, the director of The Revenant and Babel and some great films, Birdman. He's coming up. But it goes back to what I was saying before. It's just about my real fascination with artistry and creativity and what inspires some of the artists that we love. The sort of catchline that we started the series with is, it's the artist that you love talking about the work that they love, and it's as simple as that, really.
Yeah, but also a host who absolutely loves what he's doing. I mean, you can tell this is a real passion project for you.
Oh, completely.
You love every second of it, right?
I love it almost as much as you love doing your program, Dan. I'm very lucky, and we've done about 45, nearly 50 guests in the last year. We're not on every week. We come through in cycles, in series, and we've just about to finish season 3. We'll be back again right at the end of the year with season 4, running through hopefully most of next year as well. So yeah, no, it's a lovely thing. And obviously, if I was on This Cultural Life being interviewed by somebody else, then my experiences of seeing the Jam at the Rainbow in 1979, as discussed on Desperately Seeking, would be a story retold.
Well, so many people loved that episode, man. They absolutely did. Honestly, it was.
Oh, really? That's nice to hear.
Yeah, it was.
Well, brilliant. You know what? I think it's probably because so many people listening to your podcast would have had similar experiences to me. I think I was just probably articulating what a lot of people would have felt in those very deeply held, cherished memories. Yeah, it's exciting. But in the meantime, this is great as well, isn't it? I've got the LP here in front of me. Have you
I love the fact. I mean, the fact that you talk about. I mean, this goes back to art history, really, as well. Everything, how Paul packages everything, is always beautiful. There's a real care and attention and attention to detail, and he gives a toss about how it looks and what you get. It's
a lovely package. The actual cover image is, as people I'm sure will have seen by now anyway, it's a collage. And I mentioned Klaus Voormann earlier, but of course, you know, there's a bit of a tribute to him, because on Revolver, not only did he have those beautiful ink-drawn portraits of the band with the hair spilling down, but there's that sort of waterfall cascade of images of the Beatles themselves, cut out by hand by Klaus. And this is a similar sort of effect, although it's almost like an eye that's seen from afar, you know, about how many faces? I don't know, 100 faces. And then some lovely images inside. And then look at that and my words on a whole page there, which is, I'm so proud finally to have a credit on a Paul Weller album. You know. You've got no idea when I was 14 years old working out the bass lines to, Thick as Thieves and Private Hell or whatever, you know, thinking, wow, only I could play on that album. And I'm not playing on the album, but I play a small part. Hey, look, it's always lovely to see you. Thank you so much for joining me once again. Anytime, Dan. Album's out now, people. You're probably listening to it straight after this or before this and stuff, but hopefully this has given you a bit of insight into how it all came together as well. And John Wilson, thank you so much for joining me, man. Absolute pleasure, Dan. Thanks very much and good luck with it. Thank you.